Welcome back to another deep dive. Okay, today we are opening up a highly classified, totally dramatic, documentary-style investigation into the case file of one Sanziri Nightbane. I mean, just imagine being a reluctant hero who knows exactly how his story is supposed to end and deciding, nope, absolutely not me, I'm gonna outrun my inescapable destiny. Well, our subject today is a young man carrying the blood of both a Dreamweaver and the Nightmare King, and he is doing literally everything in his power to avoid this terrifying family legacy that's documented in a mysterious crimson book called the Tome of 13 Rules. Throughout this explainer, we're going to examine the immense psychological tension, his incredibly bizarre training methods, and, well, the absolute inevitability of fate. So grab your notepads, folks, because this case file, it's a wild ride.
Right off the bat, we've got to look at this quote. The shortest cut to a fate you want to avoid is the path that seems to avoid it almost completely. I mean, seriously, read that again. The dramatic irony here is absolutely dripping from the text. This right here is the central, inescapable theme of Sanziri's entire existence. By aggressively refusing his inherited fate, like literally charting out the exact tragedies his parents and grandparents faced and running in the total opposite direction, Sanziri inadvertently triggers the exact sequence of events he's so terrified of. It is the ultimate self-fulfilling prophecy. Watching this all unfold is honestly like watching a slow-motion train crash, except the train is entirely powered by the driver's desperate attempts to hit the brakes. Crazy, right?
So here is our investigation docket for today. We'll be covering the reluctant heir's logic, training, tech versus tradition, case file Rule 1, unseen fate, Rules 2 and 3, Rule 4, the virtual duel, and finally, the inescapability of destiny. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the reluctant heir's logic, resisting an inherited fate.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand Sanziri, you have to understand the immense pressure the poor guy is under. Look, he's the first son of Zan, who is a legendary Dreamweaver, and Ayumi, the Flame Knight and Princess of Dreams. Oh, and not to mention, his grandfather is literally the Nightmare King. I mean, talk about a heavy genetic payload, right? But Sanziri, he just desires a normal, totally uneventful life. He wants absolutely nothing to do with the epic, traumatic, tragic romances and battles that completely defined his ancestors. And because of this, his internal logic is full of these brilliant contradictions that are honestly kind of hilarious when you break them down. On one hand, he desperately seeks to avoid what he calls the family curse of tragedy. But on the other hand, he relentlessly trains to defeat a theoretical final boss. It makes no sense. He's this boy claiming he wants absolute peace, yet he spends his days rigorously preparing for a life-or-death battle. Plus, he uses video game tropes to interpret lethal reality, genuinely believing that if he treats life like a game, he can somehow cheat the system. But the most fascinating contradiction here is that he subconsciously limits his own physical capabilities. Because he can't execute the real-world moves his mind conceptualizes in game terms, he inadvertently keeps himself right in the danger zone, totally unprepared for the reality of his lineage.
Moving on to Section 2, training, tech versus tradition. Leveling up through disconnects. So because Sanziri hasn't manifested traditional elemental abilities like his siblings, his training is, well, highly unorthodox. Inside the Nightbane household, there's this massive dichotomy. Over on the traditional side, his siblings, Saito, Ariel, and Kirin, rely on formal elemental mentorships and a combat logic that's entirely based on defending humanity. Their mentors are literally the strongest Dream Knights. But then you look at Sanziri's modern tech training. His primary tools, a PlayStation Neo, virtual reality, and about 500 episodes of anime. I'm not kidding. His combat logic is built entirely on video game tropes, reading boss patterns and calculating HP. And his mentors? Supposedly just virtual NPCs, though we actually learn later that these are secretly actual Dream Knights logging in to spar with him. But you want to know the absolute best part of this contrast? It's the disruption method. While his siblings rely on methodical, theoretical explanations, Sanziri's mother, Ayumi, teaches him real-world unpredictability via a move she hilariously dubs the strategically annoying but ever-useful, undetectably stealthy disconnect with no warranties, which is literally just her walking over and kicking the plug out of the wall while he's fighting a boss. It's a comedic masterclass in teaching a gamer that reality absolutely does not play fair. Before we actually get to the rules themselves, I really want to direct your attention to the visual language of Sanziri's world, because it is incredibly symbolic. The imagery transitions from these cool, peaceful lunar blues, like the shining river under the moonlight where he first meets Ciela, and it shifts into bright, aggressive solar yellows of the sunflower fields.
and eventually into the striking crimson red of his cape. As the story shifts from those quiet lunar blues to these vibrant, bloody solar colors, Sanziri's destiny is literally taking root. The environment itself is signaling to us that the peace he so desperately desires is bleeding out into the conflict he is fated for. Which brings us to Section 3. Case File, Rule 1, the Rhino and the Cape. To understand exactly how Sanziri gets trapped, we have to look at the Tome of 13 Rules. This is a mysterious crimson book given to his grandfather that outlines the exact unavoidable conditions for his tragic fate. And of course, Sanziri thinks he can outsmart it. So let's trace the chronological timeline of how he inadvertently fulfills the very first rule. At 9 p.m., he meets a girl named Ciela Solstice weeping at the lunar field. He actually tries to walk away, literally performing a 180, then a 360, then a 720 to avoid her, but his inherent goodness just forces him to help her. Then, at 11 p.m., he goes home and receives a gift from his siblings, a crimson and blue cape. The very next morning, at 8 a.m., an unmanned, possessed armored tank starts rampaging through the city. At 8:15 a.m., seeing Ciela in mortal danger, Sanziri relies on his gaming terminology. He dons that red cape to draw aggro and act as a decoy. And by 8:30 a.m., using a spectacular video game move, he sinks the tank into the ocean. But here is the kicker, folks. He sinks it at a geographical location, literally named Bloody Cape. So why does that timeline matter so much? Well, because the first rule of the tome literally states he will defeat a rampaging rhino while wearing a bloodied cape. Now, Sanziri thought a rhino meant an actual, literal animal from the zoo. But as his grandfather points out, dream entities take on forms that humans can comprehend. The armored tank was the corporeal manifestation of the rhino, and he defeated it wearing a crimson cape, falling into a location called Bloody Cape. This perfectly proves a major theme of our case file. Pulling off a really cool hurricane kick to save the day still lands you right in the inescapable lap of fate. By trying to protect his secret identity and treat the lethal situation like it was just another game level, he perfectly fulfilled the very first condition of his doom. All right, Section 4, Unseen Fate, Rules 2 and 3, How Perception Shapes Reality. The psychological tension of the tome really ramps up when we look at the symbolic meaning of names, specifically through our catalyst character, Ciela Solstice. The meanings here perfectly outline their central conflict. Let's break it down. Sanziri means destroyer of lies, and Nightbane means he who curses the darkness. Put those together, and his name means the light of truth. He represents an objective, inescapable, inherited reality. On the other hand, Ciela means sky, and solstice implies choice. So her name represents an extension of fate, dictating the person you choose to be. What we have here is inherited truth colliding directly with chosen fate. Their meaning wasn't just a random coincidence, it was an absolute conceptual inevitability. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is watching Sanziri's logic absolutely implode. Rule 2 states he will meet a girl whose name is tied to his fate from a land not his own. Naturally, Sanziri thinks this means a literal foreign country, right? But no, the universe plays a massive trick on him. Ciela just transfers from another high school. Boom, Rule 2 is triggered. Then we hit Rule 3. She will love him whose face she has never seen. Sanziri immediately assumes this means Ciela must fall in love with his masked, caped alter ego. So when he finds out Ciela actually has a crush on plain old unmasked Sanziri from his normal class, he rejoices. He genuinely thinks he beat the curse. But then comes the horrifying realization. Ciela has seen Sanziri's face, sure, but she has never seen the face of the superhero who saved her because he was wearing sunglasses and a cape. By reversing the logic, his alter ego disguise completely ruins his escape plan and perfectly fulfills Rule 3. It is pure tragic comedy. Section 5. Rule 4. The Virtual Duel, Video Games versus Reality. This brings us to the climactic manifestation of our explainer. The tome consistently forces real-world consequences onto video game behavior, which creates this massive underlying tension. Let's review. Rule 1's Rhino became an armored tank, forcing gaming combat into lethal reality. Rule 2's Foreign Land became a school transfer, showing his social avoidance just couldn't beat basic logistics. Rule 3's Unseen Face became a crush on his civilian self, proving his superhero disguise was actually a massive liability. And now we get to Rule 4, which reads, to two families that have been at feud for ages, he will restore peace. This manifests as the Excalibur avatar of Pain Virtual Duel against a girl named Concordia. Here, virtual stakes are masking a literal historical family feud. It's wild. During this virtual duel, we get an absolutely jaw-dropping plot twist involving the number 7. Remember how Sanziri thought his PlayStation Neo was just a piece of hardware, and he was struggling to beat the final boss of his game?
Well, his father reveals during this duel that Sanziri's virtual training was actually a remote connection to his grandfather, the Nightmare King. And get this, the grandfather had fought him using 7 self-imposed power limiters, meaning all those years, Sanziri was only fighting 2/7 of a real final boss's power. He had been subconsciously limiting his own physical abilities because he truly thought he was just playing a game. And that brings us to the stakes of this duel, represented by the number 10. You see, Concordia is furious because Sanziri's father once cheated her father in a video game by kicking the plug out. Yeah, that famous stealth disconnect. So, to avenge her family's honor, Concordia challenges Sanziri to a VR battle. The stakes? 10 years of free video games. But Concordia isn't playing around here. She sets up an EMP-shielded, solar-powered arena with absolutely zero chance of a stealth disconnect. The tension here is astronomical. Sanziri can no longer rely on his mother's trick. He has to fight a real, breathing opponent with a vendetta in a virtual space completely unshielded.
Section 6. The inescapability of destiny. Acceptance over resistance. To survive an onslaught of thousands of independently controlled virtual arrows from Concordia, Sanziri finally has to stop pretending he's just a gamer. He verbally unlocks his own power limiters inside the game. He accepts his inherited strength, utilizing a blazing whirlwind kick that literally turns oxygen into a laser cannon. He completely embraces the legacy of the Dreamweaver and the Nightmare King. Now, despite going all out, he actually loses the match when he gets abruptly distracted by Ciela walking into the room. But here's the brilliant twist, and this brilliantly illustrates the whole point. His opponent's name, Concordia, literally means peace or union. By engaging in this fierce, fair virtual duel without cheating, Sanziri resolved the lingering bitterness between their parents. Furthermore, Concordia acts as a play on words. Con for Castle of Nightmares, and Kud for King of Dreams. By fighting Concordia, Sanziri unknowingly fulfilled Rule 4, restoring peace to feuding families. Literally every single step he took to fight his destiny only cemented it further. So as we close this case file on the tome of 13 rules, I leave you with this question to ponder. Will treating life like a video game save you, or just speed up the arrival of the final boss? Sanziri Nightbane tried everything to cheat the system, rely on glitches, and hide behind an avatar. But Destiny doesn't care about your controller. Sometimes the only way forward isn't hitting reset. It's leveling up and accepting the path laid out before you. Think about what you are resisting in your own life, and whether your resistance is actually the very thing pulling you toward it. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and hey, keep your eyes open. You never know when your own final boss might appear.